New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Hello and welcome back. I am Reverend Dr. Sharri Johnson, your host for Global Focus today. And we have a very unusual, all right, that's the only kind of guest I have, but this one is really remarkably unusual, I think. Minister visiting us today, Reverend John Odden, has a focus ministry that his focus is on spiritual care for folks in a health crisis. But how he got there is an amazing story. And the tools he's using are going to blow your mind. So help me welcome, I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to let him tell you because it's really, really neat. Help me welcome Reverend John Odden from Spiritual Care Everywhere, which is really online. Thank you so much for coming back. I'm so grateful that you did. This is all so exciting and different. And you know, unique just tickles me anyhow. So tell us what Spiritual Care Everywhere, what is it? What's it about? And why is it there?
Originally, Sharri, I started out from an experience I had when I was just a spiritual practitioner before I ever went to Holmes Institute and became a minister, volunteering at a local hospital. And I found that I was doing this at the only faith-sponsored hospital known in the country that had volunteers like this. And so over time, you know, I enjoyed more people to support with prayer. I mean, that's why I made the commitment and did the training to become a practitioner, to be able to support people with prayer. I thought that that was a good thing decades ago. And then I started asking around after being in that environment, and I'd done technical work in life sciences, pharmaceutical companies, government agencies, health plans, big medical groups and hospitals. But, you know, this is different. It was my personal thing, pray with people. And I started asking around, and people said, we don't have enough folks on our staff to offer spiritual care, and we're not going to offer it and then have nobody to show up and do it. And then I figured, well, you know, maybe I could connect volunteers in the community with people in the world of healthcare. And that was, if you will, the start.
So you were a compu geek who went to ministerial school and found a way to make that be a ministry. I love it.
And it started out though with that focus on health. And I've got to tell you that since we last spoke, I've been turned upside down and inside out. This happens in the world of New Thought. You know, we believe we know, and then Spirit shows up and says, guess what, Johnny? And I started actually, once I found the possibility to be able to connect people to where you didn't have to, especially during the pandemic, it was hard to have family couldn't go in, let alone volunteers to offer a prayer, and the work of chaplains around end of life and morally intense decision-making support was overwhelming. And a lot of people would say, go be one more chaplain. And I kept looking at this feeling like, as a person who's got a love and a passion for spiritual care support, prayer ministry, if you will, what about this? So I started doing the math once I found a way to very affordably create the connections, imagining that would be doing good. And I suddenly figured out that there was no feasibility of enough volunteers to support the exploding demand for care in the broad world, even beyond healthcare. I started, reading about how even workplaces, big companies were tearing their hair out with how do we offer support for the well-being, comfort, and mental health of people in this changing workplace. And I would hear these things and I would go, ding, 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 spiritual care. And I was hearing about the crisis in schools, where you've got to get the school operating, but then you've got to get the kids functionally present. And like kids are having challenges. And then finally, I saw an article in it was like Sunday magazine or something. And it was an article that came from one of those across my Apple News about how teens were increasingly choosing to exit this world via suicide in worrisome numbers. And then I quickly realized that the need for this spiritual care everywhere wasn't everywhere in healthcare, that I wrote everywhere when I applied to do this. And I suddenly realized it really is everywhere, and then had to go back and do a rethink. How do we create an on-ramp so people can have some quick support, useful support, shaped to their culture and their background, and not just leave more people to go to desperation and depression?
Well, that's a fabulous question. How did you answer it?
Well, the thing I looked at is, did we have examples of responsive spiritual care? And I know many of us in
Wait, say that term again. Responsive spiritual care. That's a really cool term. I like it.
I was trained by many wonderful professors and ministers and prayer leaders that, at least in the New Thought tradition, and let me just say that in some traditions, the prayer might be reading a psalm. Perfectly valid. I have a late mother-in-law who, on top of everything else, would every day pray the rosary. Perfectly good, right? And on the other hand, those things are not everyone. There's actually many faith traditions, and no matter whether people practice in a church or have something they do privately or have a culture, we all have our roots, and we all have some aspect, if you will, of spirituality in our psyche, and how we as humans in this current mix came to here today, now. And spiritual care is just about tending to those beautiful energies and traditions that have brought us forward, broadly considered. And then when the headlines in the world of crisis and the end and whatever negative headlines sometimes get people tipping towards depression, the thing that I realized, that whether it's at work, at home, at school, or going into the hospital for treatment, right? The question is, how can I quickly get a personal positive headline? Yeah. And I began to look at, well, is there a way to draw on that library of spiritual care and then come up with a way to adapt and customize some initial responses so that people can have their personal positive headline, if you will, and then to start measuring and talking about that off of the vision that if there was a realization that humanity's at a point where people need a positive spiritual care, that positive personal headline, that then we might see more of a shift back to more people showing up for practitioner training. Not everybody needs to become a chaplain. If we were to train up like chaplains to meet the full need, I think there'd be like half the people would be chaplains or something. And that's not realistic. It'd be too many. You couldn't get there fast enough. And the other part, too, is we need to be affordable. Even the cost of a volunteer is not zero. And if you want to pay someone professionally, that's not zero. Just like I wouldn't go to the brain surgeon who said, I'll cut that tumor out for free. Probably not my first choice. Now, does it need to be more money than I can possibly have? And do I need to be devastated by healthcare? That's the trick. So then the thought process is around, how do we adapt the resources in the loving world around us to create a feasible, quick, extremely low cost way to do the first thing? Not the perfect thing, not the ultimate thing, but the first thing. And we're piloting a way to do that, drawing on some of it's somewhat controversial, but if you put guardrails on it and keep your head screwed on straight, it's possible to do good things. And that's kind of where we are today.
So tell us about the ramp and the guardrail. What does it look like? I mean, what's the mechanics? What does it look like right now?
Well, right now it looks like the simple ability for a person to name a theme, topic, or focus for the spiritual support, spiritual care they want in a few words, and then get back a very generic affirmation, prayer, spiritual mind treatment, something very simple that jumpstarts their ability to speak into spirit their emerging positive future. It's something that is any seasoned practitioner in New Thought will tell you is based on the notion that as we pray or treat, whatever you want to call that, or affirm for people who are agnostic or atheistic, right? That as we do that, the principle of spirituality kind of opens our perception and our awareness to different options and pathways. I mean, it goes all the way back to like the first kind of experiences I had supporting people once I was a practitioner. And the ones who came back and said, I got to tell you, I don't know why or how, but I've had my miracle. You know, I sat with you and you prayed that in this impossible situation when nothing could be done and it was all horrible, that something could come over the horizon, shaped and formed from whatever divine resources that would be adequate to bring the healing, bring the peace, and make it possible. And I left hopeful. No clue how, at a very discouraging time, but I left hopeful. And I said, and then I got to tell you, the most astounding miracle has appeared in my life. And it's not that I made the miracle. And it's not necessarily that there's this behind the stage, as Plato would tell it, some force running around orchestrating it. It's just that humans are all in a spiritual theology context. Manifestations are energetic, loving expressions of this creative spirituality. And as we ever so subtly shift our focus, our awareness, if we perhaps open up blinders, if you will, that things start to weave together in a different way. And to me, that's the engine of miracles. And if you want to, some people would say, it's hooey, New Thought is bogus. That's a long discussion that goes off into philosophy and psychology. But I would say that when people challenge me on, is even spiritual mind treatment valid? And if someone comes back and they report something, I would say, well, consider it analogous to the process used by another religious organization, the Roman Catholic Church, and the fact that they have this concept of, these people who are saints. And rather than living in a world where, as a New Thought person, I feel that there's a few who live in a way that's connected with miracles. To me, I always go back to what I first found out studying New Thought, that the nature of miracles is it's a word, that positive headline in our heart that in an interactive universe puts things in motion in a different way. And then I look back at relationships I've formed, things I've accomplished, careers that I got into and had success with, when people were saying, there's no there, and you're irrelevant and unqualified. You can't possibly do that. I go, okay, well, whatever. I'll just throw that into my prayers and we will see what happens. And I believe in part it's that see what happens that's worked for me and many people I know who are ministers in New Thought. And so another way to say it, perhaps, Reverend Sharri, is that the goal of spiritual care everywhere is to give people in any setting the kind of a headline that lets them have that same caliber of, it worked even better than I imagined.
So let me make, I confirm my learning by teaching it back. So what I'm hearing you say is that your goal with spiritual care everywhere is to make access to supportive prayer, responsive, I love that word, responsive supportive prayer, pretty much universal, and doing that through the internet.
Right. Well, it's funny you should ask. If you'd have asked me 90 days ago, I would have said internet required. And, but part of it is our vision and why we're continuing to front it as a nonprofit rather than chasing money and selling out and going to buy an island or something crazy. I'm just being facetious when I say that. Why we're keeping it as a focus ministry is the idea that it'll be a kind of a white label thing, if you will. It's like you don't go to a building with a big sign on the top that says Visa to get a debit card or a credit card. You go to your bank, and then your bank has their name on the branch, like such and such credit union or whatever it is, and they have their logo on your chip card and so forth, and they provide a website where you log in and you see what you're doing. The idea was to do this in a way, the simple capacity for basic spiritual care everywhere, and a similar kind of a white label where like Visa helps the banks with the card, to help any healthcare entity, any house of worship, any government agency, any employer, any university or school have a capacity to offer immediate, quick, simple, responsive spiritual care, and for them to be able to do it according to the faith choices. I would imagine that there's an Episcopal church where I went to a memorial service recently. They would probably offer preference to an Episcopal focus. I can imagine a government agency would say, well, we can't flog a religious tradition, so we'll let people choose between agnostic, atheist, Catholic, Lutheran, Muslim, Hindu, whatever they might do. And similarly, the other thing we're looking at is, well, what about language? Because especially in like the area where I live, there's a lot of people actually, there's a lot of people who speak Spanish. There's a lot of people who speak Farsi. There's a lot of, ignore politics for a moment. We are a nation here that is still a melting pot. There's many cultures, many languages, and so forth. And the thing that caught our attention once we rethought that we can't possibly make enough person-to-person connections. We know how to do it cost effectively if there were enough connections to be made, right? But then the next thing was like, okay, so we've got to just, without a person at the other end, respond now. And then the next thing we looked at is, well, okay, and can we do it with the cultural focus? Can we do it with the religious choice focus? And then you dig and scrap and sweat on it, and you go, it's possible. So, and then the next thing that happened, though, and this comes back to 60 days ago, there's actually tools available that don't run on the internet, where by the end of 2024, there'll be a version of an internet service that somebody could run like on the company computer, on their laptop even. And so the idea that, wait a minute, we could give people a little resource for a little bit of human support, and we could shrink it down to where they could just have it not only at their fingertips, but even if they're not on the internet. And we don't know how that might play out, but the world is changing so fast. And I think in some ways, humans are at a loss to open up and comprehend and adapt to the good that's there for them, the possibilities that are there to take some small shifts that suddenly result in my life better.
And so here's what I'm seeing in that. Remember, I taught college computer science for 35 years. Okay. So that's where my head goes. I'm seeing what you're talking about is a little baby Turing machine, a spiritually directed, spiritually influenced, spiritually expressive Turing machine. You ask it a question and it finds all of the possible answers. So if you say, I'm a Buddhist and I have this situation and I need help with that, and it comes back with the support that you need because it learns from, it's adaptive. That's the word I'm looking for. Not just responsive, but adaptive. Wow. Oh, you give me God bumps.
No. A part of it, is a God bump thing, Sherry. But I would also say that part of it is how do we shape and blend technology with people? And as I looked at the ideas that were starting to rumble around in my noggin and try to figure out how to express them, I realized that quite a lot of what I'd done, going back to like my first job, I knew I would need some money to go to college. And so when I was in high school, I would go over to a local university campus and I would try to bum jobs. And a professor in the psychology department had a grant report that he had to write. And he needed somebody to draft a report critiquing all the available computer-based training modules on this big list, all kinds of authors, all kinds of topics, big list. And it would normally be the job for a grad student. And all the grad students in the psychology department looked at that task and said, yeah, I'm going to do some other thesis, not interesting, looks very boring. So this high school student shows up willing to work for, I guess it was called minimum wage. I would have called it barely $10, for God's sakes. And said, okay, here's the task. Come in here, sit there. Here's the list. And then you sit on one computer and you take all this computer-based training. And then on this other one over here, you type up what you did and what you think worked and where you think it had rough spots. And so from that very early experience, I started thinking about, can this technology stuff help humans? Or is it just a bunch of BS? And then I also was looking at, due to that first task, like, well, where are the rough edges to polish? And so I've had like a couple careers that you would basically call your friend Reverend John runs around polishing rough edges. And even when I would, as a practitioner, after I went that way decades ago, would view my responsive prayer support for people as helping them polish the rough edges in their life. And then you take that same paradigm and you focus it on some of the headline grabbing technology stuff that's going on, whether it's like a generative AI or, like these large privacy enhanced databases. You look at all these different things that are out there and you start thinking about, just the question of, okay, how can you get some initial responsive spiritual care response. And then you go into the mode of, if you don't polish it, it's ugly. Now we use the polishing rough edges approach and figure out how can you make it. Actually, there's some people in technology who talk about making technology habitable. Just like if you had a house and it had no heating, no cooling, and no plumbing, it would not be habitable. So you start thinking about, well, habitable and polishing the rough edges. And our report, which is why we are still doing it and why I haven't just gone and hunted down a pulpit or opened a house of worship, is that it's very possible.
When you say habitable, I think of a term I learned when I was in math. My undergraduate degree is in math because University of Missouri, Kansas City didn't have a degree in computer science until the September after the August that I graduated with a degree in math. So then I had to go back and take all that stuff. But the term they use in math for what you're talking about, polishing the rough edges, is elegant. First, you make it right. Then you make it fast. Then you make it elegant. That's the mathematical approach to something. And that's what I hear you saying is you're making prayer fast, accessible, and elegant.
So I'm going to have competing stories here for a moment with you. And then I'm going to go back to the source of my competing story and honor someone who actually had a early profound influence on my development as a person. So you talk about getting a degree in math because they didn't offer the computer science at the university you were in at that time as a major. So I got into university, and my interest was studying whatever kind of science could help me figure out how computation and computing could help people. I actually wrote that in my application. And I had, there was a book that I got when I was in high school, Run, Computer, Run. And, that's just like today. You look at some of the headlines and you might say, Run, Google, Run, or Run, Meta, Run, or Run, OpenAI, Run, far away. Anyhow, so against that background, I applied and I met with a college admissions person who said, we will offer you admission. And I went back and reported that they'd read my application and offered me admission. And everyone around me said, he's just being polite. With an application like that, there is no chance you will possibly be admitted to a serious university. And so even when I left, everyone around me was saying, yeah, you're going to come back because they're just jerking your chain. They just want you to make a deposit. They're going to keep the money, and you're going to be asking us to wire you money so you can get back to the Midwest. And then even when I got there, I was assigned an advisor, and this is where I'm going to compete. My story will compete with your story. Not only was there no computer science major, but the first advisor I got was an internationally renowned chemical engineering professor. And he asked, like, why are you here? What do you want to study? And then he said, well, what did you put in your application? You got admitted. And I told him, and he said, that idiot, we should have never admitted you. I want you to resign right now and leave and go work at a gas station or do something where you can actually make a real contribution. And then there was another professor that used to be there up until the year I arrived. And the guy said, he said, why did you think we have anything here that you would want to study? And I said, well, you have so-and-so on the faculty. He said, no, we don't. He's an idiot. We ran him off. And he said, we always compete with that Stanford University. They think they're so hot. And they hired the guy that we got rid of because he's an idiot. And he's going to form some kind of new department there. He thinks that Stanford is going to have some kind of like a computer science program. It's going to destroy Stanford and wipe them off the map. And so, I'm thinking like, okay, my choices are go back to the Midwest, tell everybody you were right, I'm an idiot, or
go to Stanford.
Ask for a different advisor.
Yeah.
So I got a different advisor. And I'll tell you about the different advisor and a couple other things here before I shift to the particular professor I want to spotlight who had nothing to do with computers, at least not as he knew it, and not as I knew it at the time. But I got a different advisor, and he asked me what classes I was taking. And some of the classes I was taking, he said, well, those are graduate classes. You don't need to take graduate level classes as a freshman. Why are you doing this? And I said, well, I had this other guy as an advisor, and he told me they ran off that fellow and I needed to leave. And I noticed that they were inviting these professors from Europe to teach these graduate classes. And these are some of the preeminent computer scientists in the world. Like they had one guy teaching about new kinds of programming languages, and they had another guy teaching about how do you set up a computer if you want it to never fail? How do you create a bulletproof, reliable computer? And that was his thing. And I said, since it's possible people like that will not even be allowed to teach a guest class, I figure I better get those now in case it never happens again. And he's like, well, he says, yeah, I understand. He said, take some easier classes. And I said, just in case I'm going to take those classes. In fact, I would tell you proudly that I got a C in the one class that in the graduate division. And afterwards, I went back and I spoke to the professor. And I said, why did I get a C? And I'd had, there was some issue. I had to take the final exam late, and he was all irritated about that. I had some health challenge, bad flu or something, and I was at the health center with a fever. And anyhow, so I got the exam and I got the grade, and I just went back to ask the professor, like, why did I get a C in the class? He said, it was the grade you deserved. And I said, well, I looked at my scores in the class, and as best as I could tell, my scores were higher than what the graduate students were all earning. And he said, that's right. And he said, I come from Europe, and in Europe, we group the grads and the undergrads separately. For the grad students, their grade is very important to being permitted to write their thesis and get their degree. He said, for the undergrads, grades don't matter. So even though you had the highest score in the class, I gave all the undergrads in my class a C. I said, how many did you have? One.
I knew it.
Then I went over to the administrative office, and I didn't necessarily have the greatest relationship with the administrative office because they were more on the side of that first advisor who, why did that idiot admit you? Go away. But I just had a polite chat with them, and I said, I just want to get informed and educated how this works. And at the end, they said, well, we hadn't really been aware of this issue. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. In the future, we will coach our visiting professors from Europe that we prefer to grade everybody together and not do it that way. And I said, how about my grade? And they said, well, you are a freshman and all we will score is that you attended and passed. So it doesn't matter. We're not going to ruffle anyone's feathers. So, you look at the way in academia, back around the time when you and I matriculated, you were at a place where computer science was emerging. I was at a place that was still playing whack-a-mole, trying to exterminate it. Mainly, that's an environment that today, if someone wants to be a professor, they would say, you will have a challenge getting the grant funding to staff your lab, provide support for your grad students, and do your work. It's tough. There's not enough commitment to the National Science Foundation to keep the universities going. And it's a theme, it's a thing. And so in that environment, the people that were playing whack-a-mole on my head felt that people like me were at a risk of diverting financial resources in a serious way, because setting up computer science, having a data center devoted to computer science is a room full of machines. It's not 100 postdoc students and whatnot. And the other thing that then I wanted to, two things. I'm going on a bunny trail, but it could be interesting. Someone might grab something from this. So then I looked at my advisor, my new advisor, as I got to know him. And so he walks me into the data center and points at one of the big mainframe computers and says, "That's mine." And I said, "How did you get it?" And he said, "Oh, the IBM company gave it to me because I'm helping them." And he was here and I didn't even know about it. In, fa- in fact, eventually I realized that I had a note in my inbox when I showed up. The professor I did my first high school project for wrote a note to that guy when he heard that I got out there and said, "Hey, I got this student, I got to offer him a job." And so my new advisor said, "Yeah, oh, you're the guy I've been trying to offer a job to help us use our new computer." And what he was doing with that computer back decades ago was setting it up so that you could ask the computer a question and get back the answer. And they had that working perfectly well decades ago. And then the IBM company came out, looked at it, and said, "This is exactly what we wanted." And then they went back to their Poughkeepsie, New York place, where their big head shed, to do it all over their way so that they could then release the product. And we had it to where everyone was told the answer must come back within a second. And for a really hard question, you can have 5 seconds and then the answer must come back. And so the rumor was that back at IBM, they could get it back usually within 10 hours. It would start to answer the way they did it. Versus the thing that was built by the students would, respond in a few seconds because there was also funding from this Department of Defense. And they said, for our applications, it can't be hours, it's got to be seconds. We need the answer now. And then you look at the recent headlines that people are all excited about. When that came out, I'm like, yeah, sure, familiar with that from way back. But then I want to take a little sideline into something that to me set up this person to turn into Reverend John. I had a class with a professor, H.J. Reiser, R-Y-S-E-R, who was in the field of combinatorics. And he would take a chalkboard and he would work on the chalkboard. And then, at the end of working on the chalkboard, he would say, "Look what we've just done. We've taken a problem that nobody can solve. We've rephrased the problem as something you can express as a matrix of zeros and ones." Any of you computer people out there will hear matrix, zeros and ones, and go, "Aha, a computer could do something with this," even though Professor Reiser didn't have computers. They were still doing whack-a-mole at that college, trying to exterminate them. And he would prove this stuff. And the stuff that he would prove that way was quite often astounding. And I can even remember a final exam where I was on the chalkboard doing something. And, and he said, "You probably don't need to continue with that approach." And I knew that meant that he didn't feel it would work. And I said, "I would wish to continue." And I remember him saying, "You may continue at your own peril." And mind you, Sharri, I needed to at least pass this class to get my degree and graduate. I continued. And then at the end, I never actually worked the whole problem because he wanted you to do a lot of questions in this final. And the final was you walk in his office, he takes the phone off the hook, he gives you a piece of chalk and a blank chalkboard, and he just starts asking you damn tough questions. So I got to the point within the next couple minutes where he said, "That's enough." And I said, "I'm sure this will work." He said, "At this moment, I agree with you. It is a very unexpected, non-standard approach, which amazingly absolutely would work if we did that, but I wish to ask you several other questions." And so my exam went on that way. And then the way he would grade you, it's not like you would go home and you'd get a little thing with your grades. He would sit down and, and within about 45 seconds, he would say, and he said, "And you've earned an A-." And as I look back at what I learned, that if you can rephrase problems in an ultimately simple manner, and then just back off and work with it a little bit, you can oftentimes find an awfully simple, right under your nose answer. And this fellow Professor Reiser was the master at doing that. And yet people in the math major would say, "Yeah, you take his class to go there to, lose your chance for a degree and die," because it was so subtle. And, the discipline needed, it was about the focus, the discipline. And I do believe that in modern life, it's about the focus and discipline, right? It's about, do we turn on a TV and then suck up a lot of headlines that were generated based purely on their ability to grab people's hearts and rip them out of their chest? Or do we want to craft a personal headline around honor, service, goodness, joy, abundance? Do we want to craft that personal headline and then work on our consciousness to open it to the possibility that we live in a loving, responsive universe that will come back with relationships, experiences, resources, and pathways to increase the good? I mean, I know we're in the camp that we've got a lot of good, and if humans could put a little bit more time into increasing the good, then the need to obsess over bad headlines and see so many of our colleagues passing depressed and discouraged, we can tip the balance.
So what you're saying is that the goal of, to grossly oversimplify, the goal of spiritual care everywhere is to give Hal compassion.
Give
Hal, from 2001: A Space Odyssey, Hal. They took out the name and backed it up one letter to the name of the computer.
Not so much. That's an overstatement of any ambition or goal. I want to give humans a rapid, possible, quick response in any moment of distress, despair, or challenge. To actually make technology compassionate, some glimmers of that may emerge.
Simplification.
Huh?
I said it was a vast oversimplification, but compassion is the essence of what you're getting at, isn't it?
Well, I guess in part it's like doing the social engineering. Like if you socially engineer a technology resource to give people a small compassionate boost, and if you've got the humility, because for me it takes like humility, I have to take my ambition and crush it down. If I can, like, what is the smallest personal nugget of a prayerful phrase that will help a person who might reach out when they're at work and a customer, F-bombs them, or they go to the doctor and they get a test, and then they get the test results and it's OMG. What is the quickest, smallest, useful thing that can activate a person to do a little bit better in that moment? And that if we can get into having that happen, and then have what I hope to do of making it possible for the sponsors who put their brand on it, whether it's a house of worship or a health plan, to start looking at where does that help. Then in healthcare, doctors talk about compliance, and when in health plans, when they worry about, we've got a lot of people who've got diabetes or obesity or whatever, any chronic condition, the thing is compliance. And to me, people who can get a little bit of spiritual care support are likely to be just a little bit more compliant. And I've done enough with public health experts to know that in public health, the tiniest little percentages can wind up many lives and billions of dollars one way or the other. So the goal here is to find the simplest good thing. And that's, and you're right. I agree with what you said. Give compassion to Hal. But it's the thought there, and the focus is how can we do the simplest useful thing, because we've created a world that's too complicated to have like the big solution. I haven't seen anyone run out with a big solution but if we start thinking about that simplest useful thing, will we then find out with even reasons for people to come back to their spiritual community?
So image just popped into my mind, and I want to see if it's connected here. When I went off to ministerial school in the previous century, somebody gave me as a gift, as a celebratory gift, a little electronic Bible. where I could look up anything that I needed. And what I'm thinking is, so the ultimate goal of spiritual care everywhere is something somebody could carry around in their hand that would give them the ability to ask the question that is in their heart in that moment and get an answer that feeds the heart.
Yeah.
Wow.
It could be a button. Initially you could call it like something that could be a button on a smartphone. Anyone who wants to sponsor could have a button on a smartphone. Someone can put in my payroll check didn't arrive, or the rent's due, one of those kinds of things, or I've got a severe tummy ache, and get back just some quick nugget of a response that makes that distress, that moment, a little bit easier. Because if we wait for people to show up at a house of worship and discover that they've got spiritual practitioners or a prayer ministry, if we wait for that to give people any response, too late, too long, too much bad trajectory in life if you wait that long. Or from the point of view of we can't get people access to behavioral health. It takes weeks to months, and we don't have enough behavioral health professionals to help people. Now, the hypothesis, which I wouldn't go say to behavioral health people, they would be probably feeling like I would defund behavioral health with what I'm saying, but I would say not so. If we can get people quick, useful response before they actually get other forms of support in the world, that quick, useful response might make it easier for the other kinds of things we're doing to have whole families, whole schools, whole lives, whole companies to actually have a chance to work by just simply reducing the fraying at the edges that one sees in modern life.
Another image pops to mind. I remember when my grandson was very small and he came to visit me and he wanted to go swimming. So I got him some of those little floaties. That's what you're talking about. You're talking about spiritual floaties to keep you up till you can get to someone who can address whatever the issue is. That is just so blinking marvelous.
Yeah, it's like, the deluxe answer might be that the ocean liner pulls up, and then the butler rushes us to a suite, and then we sail across the river. Or the minimal version might be people show up in a pontoon boat and paddle us across. But if you will, the spiritual floaties approach, and even to, like, you don't need like a big, huge thing. My perspective is that the focus on having like the minimum positive personal headline that just opens my heart just a little bit. Doesn't need to crack my heart wide open. I mean, sure, there's people I've encountered in a house of worship who sat down for prayer, and then something that's had a death grip on their soul breaks open and falls off, and it's like a great big catharsis. Accept it when it happens, but to expect it every time, no, not realistic. So just that, I think that small difference will then earn the opportunity for spiritual care everywhere to start looking at, hey, is there a bigger difference? And also, since we understand the tech issues with connecting for, teleprayer, either voice or video teleprayer, as the world emerges and becomes visible to support those other modalities, then people can have spiritual care everywhere in all forms. And then I believe we could then envision a world where people could have like mental health care when they need it. I mean, I would tell you that even that one is tough. There's a member of my extended family who was having a hard time finding access to mental health. And then after getting access, he had a hard time with compliance. And you've got a mental health professional that says, I can help. Had a hard time with that. And then we got to an incident where, the person was in the ER, emergency room, and the emergency room people were thinking, was this a suicide attempt, right? And then there was, and as I listened to all of this, and realizing this is people I know and love experiencing something that was far from their best day, far from a good day, right? So then there was the occasion where the authorities knocked on the door, as I heard about it later, saying we understand someone's in grave danger here, and we'd like to check it out. And the police and the health services agencies take team everywhere, and responding to cases where people are in distress is a tough part of what they do. Even around us, there's like a special division, a company the city hired that provides these big blue vans that provide love to people and tries to go out and help because there's not enough police to do it. And then you next get the challenge that the big blue vans can't figure out how to get people to get into the van and come to a place with a warm bed and food. And so we've obviously got fraying at the edges. Anyhow, so the authorities went, in the case of this example I'm making, they went to the home and they went inside, and then afterwards, like they went in and talked to people, and we're all okay here, fine. And then they kept coming back, knocking on the door, and finally, some weeks later, someone probably said, why were they coming back? And apparently, someone said maybe they looked up and saw the blood that was sprayed all over the ceiling.
Oh my goodness.
So you look at the way that life frays at the edge. People are in screaming pain that terrifies them. I think those who departed early often are in some form of a screaming pain that terrifies them, can't speak about it, don't know how to say help. And there's other ways and shapes of that fraying at the edges. And so I've just started to look at what can we do in a simple way to just reduce the fraying a little bit, and perhaps then earn the way to make a contribution, because you can see, like health plans, communities, government agencies, lots of people, ministers, right, trying to do the good things. So how can we just smooth it and speed it up a little bit and make it a little easier? That's kind of my mantra.
Cool. Okay, so we're coming up on time, so I'm going to ask you my 4 questions. And I think you've probably answered the first 2 of them already, but I'm going to let you just kind of polish it a little bit. And the first one is, how does spiritual care everywhere encourage, enhance, pick your own verb, conscious evolution?
Yeah, so we do that by being accessible in a simple way at any time when a person bumps into a stressful challenge, and supports them in picking a positive step up versus going off the rails or descending into pain.
Yep. Okay, and same question, but instead of conscious evolution, world peace.
Right. So at a time when society is visibly fraying around the edges, or you read a headline about Gaza, you say like on fire in a horrific way under our nose, or Ukraine for that matter. By reducing the fraying at the edges, hopefully creating more mental bandwidth around the world to go to the places where we've got larger scale, tough problems that we're failing to solve, but want to solve.
Cool. And presuming that everything goes exactly the way you want it to go, every detail, every event, every encounter, every relationship, everything goes exactly the way you want it to go. 10 years from now, what does spiritual care everywhere look like?
Oh, probably 10 years out, it looks like it being typical when a person goes to school or goes to a job, that instead of like a special assistance plan or an employee assistance program, that there's real simple resources that if a person's encountering a little stress or challenge, they've got a friendly resource that may well help them get forward, or help them figure out that they want to draw on the more serious resources that this loving world has to help them.
And it's just there. It's just natural. Oh, gosh, I love that. Okay, here's the last question. Will you come back?
Love to come back.
The first opening I have is Christmas Eve. Can I plug you in?
Let's do it.
All right. I'll send you an email when it's closer. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is so exciting and so interesting. And folks, I want you to know next week is going to be wonderful too, because next week our guest is Reverend Dr. Bill Marcioni. He's from New Thought, Philadelphia, but he's also the administrator of the affiliated New Thought Network. So he's got all kinds of interesting new stuff to talk about. Don't miss it. You won't want to miss out. See you then. Have a wonderful week.
Amazing, amazing. You will do amazing things. Amazing, amazing. You will do amazing things.
On behalf of everyone at New Thought Media Network, thank you for being a member of our virtual family. Your financial contributions help share the New Thought message with people from around the world. Please visit and contribute at www.ntmedia.org/donate. New Thought Media Network, come be you. And please like, share, and subscribe.